Hi, I'm Greg Hillstrom, host of the Agile brand, and here's a question for you. What if the biggest obstacle to delivering a world class customer experience isn't your technology or your strategy, but the very way your teams are structured and enabled to work? Agility requires more than just rapid iteration, it demands a deep understanding of the human elements within your systems. It's about creating an internal environment that can fluidly adapt to and even anticipate the needs of the external customer. Today, we're going to talk about the often overlooked foundation of successful business transformation, the human experience. We're going to explore why the employee experience isn't just an HR initiative, but a direct driver of customer outcomes, and how designing systems around the way people actually think, not just how we're organized on a chart, is critical. We'll also get into the practical application of a human centered lens to business processes and why so many large scale changes fail when they don't properly connect the dots between people, processes, and technology. Welcome to Season 8 of the Agile Brand Podcast. This season, we're going all in on expert mode MarTech, AI, and customer experience, talking with the people and platforms behind the brands you know and love. Again, I'm your host, Greg Kilstrom, and I help Fortune 1000 companies make sense of MarTech, AI, and marketing ops. Hit subscribe or follow to make sure you always get the latest episodes, and leave us a rating so others can find us as well. And make sure you check out our sponsor, TechSystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world adoption. For more information, go to techsystems.com. Now let's dive in. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Jennifer Jones, Chief Strategy and Experience Officer at RGP. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this topic. Definitely top of mind for me many days. Before we dive in, though, why don't you give a little background on yourself and your role at RGP?
Okay, great. Well, I formerly CMO here, and recently kind of just expanded my role into Chief Strategy and Experience Officer, which actually makes sense coming from my background. Started in agencies, doing full service advertising, creative director, and then moved into founding and building a practice in human centered design. So, doing all of the front end disciplines of research strategy, content design, and development for clients. And I think my role here is just to really focus on the connection of, I always like to call it the why and the who to actually figure out the what and the how.
Mm.
And, really bringing kind of full circle my career together in this role. So the advertising part, the digital transformation part, as well as the experience and strategy part of those things.
Yeah, love it. Well, yeah, let's dive in here. And I want to start by talking about that. Like I teed up in the intro, the strategic link between the employee experience as well as the customer experience. And a lot of leaders still view employee experience and customer experience as separate domains. How do you define the employee experience ecosystem and what's the connection and what's the mechanism which those two are tied?
I mean, there are two sides of the same coin, in my opinion. I think if you think about like the most beloved brands that have just like excellent customer experience, it's usually because they have a good employee experience as well. And having done a lot of transformational type projects and applying it from a service design perspective, you're not just looking at the end users, you're looking at all of the constituents in the journey. So, if you think about like a call center, for instance, and you think about like, oh, people are calling in and they're having poor experiences, like the call center person doesn't know like, the information, they don't know, and they're not getting their questions answered. But
Right.
then if you look at it from the call center side, it's like maybe they don't have tools that are actually giving them the information. They don't know the first 5 times somebody is called because it's not in their call log that they're seeing. And so
Yeah.
oftentimes a lot of those problems are interconnected. And I think like, to be a brand that actually like competes from a customer experience standpoint, you got to compete from an employee experience standpoint. You need to, create dynamics that are going to make people excited to be there, to build a culture that people like actually want to be a part of. And that's going to come through in, everything that a client touches, whether it be when they talk to somebody on the phone or when they
Right.
deal with a salesperson. I mean, all of those feelings are gonna come through, and so I think it's, like, critically important And I think even just, like, literally, so that's kind of like the experience side of things, but like I mentioned about that call center example, I mean, most tools, most digital things are so interconnected, and if, like, an employee can't actually access the things they need, they're not gonna be able to actually service the journeys in the same way. So I think, like, you it doesn't ever start and stop, it's one continuous journey.
Yeah. Well, and for those, CMOs listening and those marketing leaders listening, and certainly you've played that role as well. Where does marketing's responsibility begin and end in all of this? Because it's surely not a purely an HR or ops function, right? So, what's the role of marketing in all of this?
Well, I think, I mean, they should be deeply connected. In fact, like we're working right now, and a lot of marketers do own sort of the intranet or the career site or the employee brand values or the employee brand value framework. But I think again, to build a solid, like successful company, it's like you have to look at it from both sides. Like, why would people want to buy from you and why would people want to work for you? And
Yeah.
I think unless those are both successful journeys, which are interconnected, then you're not going to have a good brand. And from what we do at our organization, it's really VOE and VOC, like truly understanding, how our employees feel, think, hear, what our customers feel, think, hear, and then tying those insights into how we develop that brand that needs to be true on both sides of the coin.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean it makes so much sense. It's amazing maybe the organizations that either haven't grasped that or haven't appeared to grasp. Yeah, again, because intellectually I don't think it's that
Yeah,
complex
wild.
a
Yeah.
concept, but at the same time, it's like we've all been there. We've all seen the employee that's like completely disengaged, and that surely reflects on our experience and our perceptions of the brand, right? So it's always kind of shocking when brands don't take that more seriously, right? So
Yeah. Think too often maybe they don't. Like, I don't think it's funny, I get asked this a lot, especially when I used to, be more in the consulting side and sell directly to clients, and they would say, "What is experience?" And I think we often kind of forget about that, and whether you're talking about employee or customer, I think people often go to it's one specific thing, like, "Oh, it's a website," or "It's a thing," right? Like, it's a thing. And or they go to, like, the visual aspects of a brand, it's like
right.
but experience is everything. It's what you touch, feel, see, it's how we talk, it's the values we hold, how those values are actually, like, performed within company communication and the culture.
Yeah.
And I think even the smallest thing is so critical because it's like, those 20 small things, like maybe somebody having a bad interaction with somebody or maybe having a weird email or, whatever it might be,
Right,
those small
right.
things
Yeah.
add up, and I think it really depends it defines whether somebody stays a loyal customer.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about human-centered process design
Mhm,
in practice. And so you've talked about designing systems around how people think, not just how companies are organized. I think the classic example is like I go back to websites that are organized like the org chart, not how a customer actually wants to
yeah,
interact or get
yeah.
a product or service, right? So maybe can you walk us through a practical example of, applying that human-centered lens to redesign, business
Mhm.
process or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, well, even just you brought up a really good example. I think having worked in a lot of employee experience and customer experience transformations when I did work on the client side of things, too often, like intranets is a good example. I
Yeah.
think, they often are approached how we're organized versus how does somebody actually think and
Right.
search for a topic. And so we used to do a lot of taxonomy exercises, which were really focused on helping like HR and IT leaders and all the different leaders in an organization really think about like people aren't going to know what that word means. That might be how you're organized or how you call items, but ultimately, how does somebody actually go and search? And you have to think about globally, that's going to be different. Those are going to be obviously different considerations. And so, in those types of projects, we do a lot of user testing and a lot of, basically research to truly understand, how people actually like search and think about items That way we
Yeah.
can actually create those taxonomies. So that's more of a tactical item. But kind of going back to your larger question, we do a lot of things from a service design perspective. I mean, which is, in my opinion, kind of taking, journey mapping and kind of the typical approach and, really putting it on steroids. But it's the idea that if you step back, and I said this at the top of the session, I think the biggest thing I've seen in my 28 years of doing this is that most organizations are like rush to the what and the how. So it's like, what do we need to do? This problem I'm presented with, it's broken. So let's go fix it. So how are we going to fix it? Oh, we're going to go procure technology, or we're going to do this integration or whatever.
Right.
Really forgetting about the why they're doing those things or who they're doing them for. And service design, in my opinion, is like when you talk about process transformation, is probably the most human-centered way to focus that. It's really thinking about it from all constituents' point of view. So not just the end user, which obviously journey maps are not necessarily synonymous with just thinking about an end user. But, I think a lot of times when people do those projects, they think, okay, let me just think about end users, which is critically important.
Right.
But I
Right.
think if you forget about the constituents that are serving the end users and the owners of those journeys, it kind of goes back to that call center example of like the things that might be broken in that journey for the customer may never be fixed if you don't actually understand the other side of the person servicing those different journeys.
Yeah.
And so I think when you go through that process, it's applying all the human centered design principles and methodologies, doing the testing, doing the ride alongs is what I like to call them, or day in the life of, actually doing diary studies, doing focus groups, doing workshops, and truly understanding like how is somebody, so from an end user, what are they trying to do? What are the tools, technologies, data, processes that they're touching? And then from an internal employee experience standpoint, the who is actually involved in servicing that journey? What are the tools they're using? How are they getting data? How are they interacting? Ultimately, what can we learn from that? What's working, what's not working? And oftentimes, like a broken customer experience is a broken tool and employee journey that when somebody's actually trying to do their work, they don't have the right data points. They don't have the right information to service the customer in the right way.
You know that moment when marketing wants a landing page, design mocks it up, and engineering says, yeah, we'll get to it? Thousands of businesses, from early stage startups to Fortune 500s, are choosing to build their websites in Framer, where changes take minutes instead of days. Framer's a website builder that works like your team's favorite design tool. With real time collaboration, a robust CMS with everything you need for great SEO, and advanced analytics that include integrated A B testing, your designers and marketers are empowered to build and maximize your .com from day one. Changes to your Framer site go live to the web in seconds with one click without help from engineering. Framer is also an enterprise solution, giving brands like Perplexity, Miro, and Mixpanel the confidence they need to build their websites in Framer. Learn how you can get more out of your .com from a Framer specialist, or get started building for free today at framer.com/agile for 30% off a Framer Pro annual plan. That's framer.com/agile for 30% off. Framer.com/agile. Rules and restrictions may apply. Do you think some of the reasons why, I mean, obviously every organization is a little bit different, in probably many ways, but I feel like a lot of the reasons why these things, they get quote unquote solved but not really solved, I guess, to
Mhm.
to your point, is I feel like there's such a, not only this time constraint of, okay, we've just got to solve it, so let's just
Time
slap
is
something on it,
Yeah.
and that thing is usually a tool or technology or something. And as anyone that's ever done process change has come to realize, it's the people and the process part, that can often be more difficult. Like, is it kind of just symptomatic of that in most cases, or how prevalent do you think that is?
I think it's really prevalent, and I think it is a lot of what you said, but if you think about, and I think, it's crazy that this stat really hasn't changed in probably 20 years, but the fact that still transformations, digital transformations, 75 to 80 or 70 to 80% fail. And
Yeah.
if you look at the reasons why, the ones that are actually cataloged, they're all people problems.
Yeah.
Lack of executive buy-in, lack of understanding the change management and the aptitude of changing, bringing people along that journey. Basically, not understanding who you're changing for, so the users involved. I mean, it's all people problems, and I think that that organizations, and people that are part of transformations, to your point, often underestimate the people problem. They think, like, "We have this problem, so this technology can solve it, or this
Yeah.
thing can solve it," and I think maybe it can, but oftentimes, like, if you ignored, like, the main thing, and you don't make that the main thing, then
Right.
I think
Right.
that technology is gonna be a more powerful potential inhibitor of change. Meaning now you've just paid a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
money and maybe you got this robust tool, but you still have the same problems persist. In fact, we worked with a Fortune 100 technology client and they were doing a finance transformation project. And they were, really going through a large sea change in finance transformation. And generally, most of it was going okay or well,
Yeah.
and they still had, two constituents that were really struggling, that were putting in all the help desk tickets, like, frustrated with the change, and so they were like, "What are we doing wrong?" Like, what is the problem here? And so they hired us just to look at the people-centered journey for these two constituents, and I think what we learned from that is that, the process that they had gone through and the systems and the tools that they had designed still ignored some of the really big issues that those particular
Mhm.
customers of this journey
Yeah.
were struggling with. And so as we then went through and sat with them and did workshops with these personas and said, okay, walk us through, I mean, it was a little bit like "Doy," kind of thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the same turn of the coin, it was really evident that until you really sit in the chair of whoever that is, you're not gonna understand those little minutia of, like, so they fill out this form, they never got an email confirmation, like, things like that, so they were sort of like, "Well, did I do the right thing?" Like,
Yeah.
like, stuff like that,
Yeah.
so it's like, I feel like people, like, underestimate the people involved and overestimate the technology and data to support the issue.
Yeah. Well, and so for those orgs that are successful, the admittedly low percent, but those orgs that are successful and really have adopted a more human centric design approach. Again, I'm sure details are different from org to org, but what are some of the themes or overall changes that occur in day to day operations to enable that more human centric design?
Well, I think I think there's 2 things. I think they're the muscle of change and the people focus of change is important, and I think some organizations have done a good job of developing that and really understanding, like, "Hey, I need to take a human-centered design approach." I still think there's a lot of people that go through the motions of that, but then when they get the data, they
Yeah.
still don't believe the truth of the data, or they're like, "Oh, wow," like, "There's a reason for that, or there's a reason for this,"
Right.
and it's like, "Sure, of course, there's the realities of everything." But I
Right.
think, like, you know, I think feedback and, um, the reality of, like, a user sitting down or a constituent sitting down and saying, "Hey, here are the things I'm struggling with within this journey or within this particular problem," is so valuable, and it's like,
Yeah.
and honestly, if we're open to that change, I think we can really improve our business just in general. Because it creates like a muscle of authenticity and believability that people actually, like, want to hear the feedback and make changes against it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that all goes to, making the transformation stick as well, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing to well, yeah, I mean, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, you mentioned the 70 to 80% failure rate, for those that are successful, beyond just, hey, we're done and, we pop the champagne or whatever. And, what are leading indicators that it's actually working and going to hold as well, as opposed to just a project being done, are there,
Well, I think that
metrics?
the
Yeah.
the biggest leading indicator that your project won't succeed long term is to think it will ever be done. I hate to say that,
Mm,
but
good
I
point.
think I think that everyone does go into kind of transformation initiatives that it's like it's done. Like, "Hey, we're
Yeah.
gonna hit target date and it's done, and then we can stop spending money on this." But number 1, digital is never done. Like, it is
Right.
a living,
Right.
breathing thing, and I think especially when I used to do a lot of digital transformation, I think there's kinda 2 unfortunate factors, that most technology to get to the level of what they show you in a demo requires so much investment, both time, money, and implementation, that I don't know that is ever really, like, evident in sort of the sales process. So that's number 1, and then number 2, I guess really relating to number 1, is that I think oftentimes people spend money and are, like, hopeful that, like, you know, "Okay, cool, I'll get this awesome technology, I'm gonna implement it," but
Yeah.
then it's like, "Oh, to do that, I would have had to buy these other 3 modules, and then I would also have to
Right.
done it, and that's gonna take me another year, and then I'm gonna have to keep doing this." And so I think we underestimate, like, the level of just long-term capacity that these things take, number 1. And then number 2, I think that the eh, generally speaking, because we treat them like projects, we treat them like, "Here's the requirements, and once we fix these requirements, there's gonna be no more problems." So I
Yeah.
think it all comes back to number 1, right? And I think that to be successful, it's like, think about this like a living, breathing thing. Be open to the fact that you're gonna need to go back to the well and you're gonna have to have continuous listening, you're gonna have to have continuous feedback, and this is gonna have to have continuous, probably, like, development, implementation hours that are constantly improving it versus it just being sort of living. That's why also a lot of technology and organizations goes so stagnant because
Right.
they didn't plan for, like, later, continued evolution of the stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I do think there's a cognitive load aspect to that too of the continuous change
Mhm.
and improvement. But I mean, is that the mindset shift that is required to do, because I completely agree with you. Like, I think once you start on that path, you're never done. It's not even just that there's more problems to solve. There's also new opportunities. It's like once you get to the top of the
That's what
hill,
I
you
mean,
see things
yeah.
that you never saw before, right? So there's new opportunities that you never thought were possible. So like what's the mindset shift to embrace, again, not only solving the problems but also embracing the new opportunities that organizations are going to need?
Well, kinda just hitting on that, you made me think about this, and I don't know if this will, like, hit, but, it's like relationships. Like, could you imagine getting in a relationship and assuming that that moment, it's never gonna change.
Right.
It's
Right.
pretty much recipe for disaster because people
Totally.
evolve, situations evolve, things happen outside of our, realm of possibility. And I
Right.
think that's no different than companies, right? Like, you go through decline, you go through growth, which obviously require different rigor, different approach, different go to market.
Mhm.
You have different people, you have different use cases, you have different needs. And so it's a little it's a wild to even think, but we all do it, including myself. Even when I've procured technology for my team, it's like we all, I think, get into the mindset of like, okay, we're going to get this done and it'll be done. But
Right.
it's
Right.
kind of wild to think like that because it's like your company is living and breathing, so it's always going to evolve, and the use cases are gonna, even if nothing else changed,
Right. Right.
that would
Yeah, I mean,
change.
I think not to get too psychological, like, I think we do all crave some kind of
Like,
consistency in our
yeah,
lives, right? So
consistency,
it's like,
yeah.
but, let's I mean, hey, this is the Agile Brand Podcast, I've come to
Well, that
terms with the fact that
I think we
we're
just put
gonna
it into the
change.
definition, be agile, right? Yes,
Right.
yeah.
Right, exactly. Well, Jennifer, it's been great talking with you, and thanks for sharing your insights. A couple last questions as we wrap up
Yeah.
here. First one, if we were having this interview a year from today, what is one thing that we would definitely be talking about?
I would say, and something that I think is gonna become more in focus is the human aspect of AI. In fact, I plan to do kind of a primary research study on that, but I think that, similar if you rewind back 20 years ago with, experienced technologies or early parts of digital transformation, people were struggling with AI in the same way. Their data is still, not
Right.
great, and the
Right.
things that are the under technologies are still not well integrated. So all the things that help make that better for an organization still struggle with what they did 20 years ago. And then I think you have the human aspect of that of like, you know, what does that mean for people's careers and how we're going to integrate with technology and how we're going to make this work. And so I think that's going to be an ongoing conversation and one to be explored for, how do you have a change mindset in your company towards AI, but not just like, hey, adopt it, but like, how do we actually truly integrate it with people workers too?
Yeah, yeah, love that. And last question for you: what do you do to stay agile in your role, and how do you find a way to do it consistently?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say, what do I do to stay agile in my role? Well, I'm always learning. I think the one thing that I love about the job that I chose, like just generally, whether I was, in my past roles or now, is that it's always been, human centered design. And
Yeah,
so I think that you're always talking to people. And so, hearing people's feedback and opinion, even if it's about like a project I'm working on, like for a company versus even about something that we're doing here, you always learn something, and I think like that can just be like the greatest ability for growth is just to hear kind of like, okay, they did these things or this happened or whatever. And then how does that apply to other things that I'm doing that I can apply it to and like learn from? So I don't
yeah,
know. I think that is the coolest part of my job because it also helps me stay agile and stay like fresh because I have to constantly do research, constantly learn why things fail and then try to make them better. And
yeah,
so that helps me kind of apply that to other areas of the world.
yeah, love it. Well, again, I'd like to thank Jennifer Jones, Chief Strategy and Experience Officer at RGP, for joining the show. You can learn more about Jennifer and RGP by following the links in the show notes. This episode is brought to you by Tech Systems. They're leaders in full stack tech services, talent solutions, and helping companies put it all in action. You can learn more at techsystems.com. That's TEK systems.com. And thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand Podcast. If you liked the episode, hit subscribe and drop a rating so others can find the show too. And if you're interested in consulting, advisory work, or if you need a speaker for your next event, feel free to reach out. Just visit gregkillstrom.com. That's GREGKIHLSTROM.com. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay curious and stay agile.
The Agile Brand.